Hello there. Welcome to Just the Dis. My name's Brian. We talk about Blu-rays here. And I'm only going to talk about a couple today. I just happen to have a couple from Kino that I thought kind of went well together. And they are these. They're some, I think, sort of underseen 80s gems. These two. And I'm going to run through them with you real quick here. I'll start with the wildlife. So this film came out in 1984. It is written by, and I think produced by, co-producer Cameron Crowe. And it's very much like a quasi-sequel to Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I've heard it called that many times, and I think that's apt because it feels of the same universe as Fast Times in some ways, in terms of the type of characters that you get that are very specific, and they feel sometimes like somebody you knew, but they also feel real to me. And so the setting is basically the Valley, California, outside of LA. Outside of the city proper in the Valley. And it is the last 2 weeks of summer before school starts again, in terms of just the timeline. And you have like a couple different storylines going. You have one with Eric Stoltz and Chris Penn, where they both work at a bowling alley and they have graduated. I can't remember if it's I think it's only been about a year. And so they've been working, and Eric Stoltz wants to move out of his parents' place and get his own apartment. Not necessarily a straight up bachelor pad, but he wants to have his own place. So in that way, this seems slightly a continuation of Fast Times, or that sort of place that the kids are in that movie. And like I said, it really lines up because it is about working kids. Like I said, Stoltz and Chris Penn work at a bowling alley. Leah Thompson, who's in the cast, works at a place called Donut City, a donut shop. Jenny Wright down there works at a department store in the clothing section. And so those characters, like Chris Penn is sort of into Jenny Wright, and Eric Stoltz used to be with Leah Thompson. They're sort of on the outs. And there's some other floating adult characters that are intriguing, like Rick Moranis plays Jenny Wright's creepy boss, who's always kind of hitting on her and has this insane pompadour. And it's actually a really good performance from Rick Moranis, and I really like it a lot. And then there is a more than somewhat sleazy cop played by Hart Bochner, who is kind of, he's involved with Leah Thompson, and she doesn't totally understand his deal. And so that's one side of things. And the other side of things has to do with Alon Mitchell-Smith's character. You might recognize him from Weird Science and The Chocolate War and things like that. He plays little brother to Eric Stoltz, and he is, I can't remember if he's starting his first year of high school or if it's his second year, but he's a sort of rebellious type. He's into, classic rock. And one of his best friends is a Vietnam vet played by Randy Quaid, who is good in the movie, but definitely kind of a sad character. Again, the melancholy creeps in that way that it does in Fast Times that I kind of like. So anyway, those are the characters at play. Chris Penn's character is just kind of like that, not so great friend that you had that had a lot of bad ideas, and you may have listened to them because he is so convincing, and he's a compulsive liar, and he's just generally selfish. And Chris Penn really nails this guy. Like, he is incredibly good as this dude, and he just sells it, and he has this catchphrase, "It's casual," which is something you'll be saying by the end of the movie. But yeah, it's just a really neat sort of coming of age over the summer story, and it was shot in Burbank and just outside of LA generally. And it has a commentary track with, I should say real quick, two things. One big question people often have with a movie like this where it's been unavailable for a long time, and you know that it has to do with the music rights, is the soundtrack intact? And it's a complicated answer for me because I say yes and no. Yes, in that it seems to match up with the most recent home video versions of this film that I've seen. And by that I mean it has the same songs that I saw on the MOD DVD that came out most recently. But apparently there are some substitutions in that version. You know, I know one specific instance, there's a Madonna song that plays over a strip club scene that apparently has been subbed out. But I hadn't seen the movie like that. So I guess part of it depends on your, did you see the movie on cable when I guess the soundtrack would have probably been intact when it played on TV? And there may be some home video VHS versions of it that had that intact soundtrack. I'm not sure. But for me, I don't really notice anything too damaging in terms of the soundtrack. You know, again, my perspective is I've seen it this way, and so it feels right. So anyway, that's the essential answer. There are definitely some songs that have been swapped, but we're not going to get another release of this movie. So basically, this is what we have, is kind of my other take. And it's still a good movie, you know, whether their songs aren't exactly right. I would love them to be, but, you know, this is what we have. So the other thing is that there is an Elon Mitchell-Smith interview, which is cool. And he's really low-key and really neat and talks about his experiences working on this movie and how he ultimately got out of acting. But he has some really interesting stories about Chris Penn and Randy Quaid. And, you know, it's not too salacious or anything, but, you know, those guys could be a little odd, I guess, on set. And, you know, so he has some fun stories about that. But I just thought a really neat interview from a guy who sort of looks at the acting part of his life as, you know, a thing that he did in the past, and he's sort of moved past it, but it's fun for him to recall it here and there. So anyway, I just thought that was neat. There is a commentary track with the late Mike McPadden and DJ Ian Christie. And Ian Christie's a serious radio DJ who also edited Mike's books. Mike had written books called Teen Movie Hell, which we talked about on Pure Cinema recently, actually, and another one called Heavy Metal Movies, which is great. And so Ian Christie runs Bazillion Points, which is the publisher that Mike published those books through. And Ian Christie also wrote a book on Van Halen himself. So he has some really good insights about the Van Halen music that is in the film. And I think most of the Van Halen cues are intact. And a lot of that is, you know, Eddie Van Halen's solo guitar, sometimes little noodlings, you know, like, or they're cutting up these tracks to use them in the film. But I do love that stuff is seemingly there and gives a great vibe for the movie. You have these Eddie Van Halen guitar tracks, and some of them are very, you know, in the background, and some are a little bit more prominent, but they all have a great vibe and energy and a rawness. And anyway, Ian Christie can speak to that stuff, is my point. But I like the commentary. It's more of a hangout track, and at about the 30-minute mark, it becomes more of a direct commentary where they're just kind of, you know, noting what they see on screen and making little comments here and there. But there are some really interesting insights. I love, one of my favorite things that Mike McPadden says is that the characters in Fast Times and this film, he was struck that they're always working kids. And he says, you know, that unlike a lot of the kids in the John Hughes films, who don't seem to have to work, and always, you know, related to that. And I too related to that. I related to working kids because that's what I did. I had a fast food job as soon as I could when I was 16, and then I worked at a video store when I was 17, and then worked at a video store for a long time after that. So yeah, I can relate to that, and I understand what he's saying, absolutely. And I think that's another reason this movie resonates with me. But anyway, so this one, as I said, directed by Art Linson, or maybe I didn't say that, but produced by Cameron Crowe and Art Linson, directed by Art Linson. The only other movie that Art Linson directed that I know of is this one, which also had music issues, by the way, Where the Buffalo Roam. This, of course, one of the earlier adaptations of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Hunter S. Thompson's novel that would later be filmed by Terry Gilliam. And this, of course, has Bill Murray in the Hunter Thompson role. It's interesting, and I do recommend this Blu-ray, actually, by the way. It's definitely one of those character pieces where some folks will be really put off by Bill Murray's interpretation of Hunter Thompson, but I kind of think it's really interesting. And the soundtrack is really good, and I think it's probably got some rescored songs in it too, but it is another case, just like Wildlife, where this one had been held up forever because of soundtrack issues, and finally Shout Select put it out. So anyway, if you wanted to do a Art Linson double, you could do those two. So then the next Kino title is North Shore, and this is from 1987. This one is directed by a guy named William Phelps and produced and co-written by Randall Kleiser. And Randall Kleiser, of course, directed Grease. That's his big hit. But he did The Blue Lagoon, he did Summer Lovers, and others. And I'm definitely a fan of his work. And there's a commentary with him and William Phelps on here, which is really interesting. And I'll talk about some of the things I learned from that. But the basic story is that you have a kid from Arizona, played by Matt Adler, who you may recognize as Lewis from Teen Wolf, if you're a Teen Wolf acolyte like me. And I've always loved that North Shore is like, this alternate universe kind of thing where Matt Adler, who is just a supporting character in Teen Wolf, is the star. And he's great in this. And it's partially because he was a real surfer and actor, and so that sort of made him perfect for this role. But he's a kid from Arizona. He wins like a wave pool surf contest, and he gets $500, and he's like, I'm going to go to the North Shore and surf the big waves there and try and make my way as a pro surfer or something. He's very naive, but that's what he thinks. And it becomes very much like a Karate Kid kind of narrative. I'm not going to say it's beat for beat like that, but I don't think it's unreasonable to call it a similar story, whether it's ripping it off or not. I'm not saying that, but if you watch it, it'll be hard for you not to go, oh, it's kind of the Karate Kid with surfing. So, he shows up in the North Shore, and he sort of immediately realizes that there are these great divides between the locals and the tourists, and the locals and what they call haoles. I think I'm even mispronouncing that, but that's just like, basically uncool people that they think they're not locals, and they're not, people that they trust. And so he immediately sort of feels this tension there and tries to sort of break in, but it's very difficult because it's a very tight-knit group of people in terms of the surfers especially, but just the locals. And they're very protective and everything. And then he meets this girl played by Nia Peoples, who is like the cousin to one of the surfers. And so that's very complicated, very West Side Story in some ways. But he also sort of meets I don't want to say father figure, but, a sort of mentor figure that can teach him how to surf. And there's also some other surfers. There's like a pro surfer there. And so there's lots of interesting interactions with characters in terms of the Karate Kid paradigm, if you will. But I don't know. I just think it's a really charming movie, and I know it's got its fans. Most surf movies are loved by surfers. And in the commentary, the one thing that I had to note was that both William Phelps and Randall Kleiser mention that John Milius was somewhat instrumental in helping with the movie, and part of that had to do with giving them some ideas for casting. He suggests a couple surfers or surfer actors that were in his film Big Wednesday, which is my favorite surfing movie, available on Blu-ray from Warner Archive. As you can see, Milius, of course, directed this movie and wrote it based on his own time surfing in Hawaii, in the North Shore area, as well as some other places. So I thought that was really cool. So I can tie in North Shore and Big Wednesday. And by the way, this would be a fun double bill. I would start with Big Wednesday and close out with North Shore, which is a little lighter. But anyway, really nice to see this get a Blu-ray. It was apparently shot by Peter Smokler, who they selected because he had worked on This Is Spinal Tap, and it was shot on Super 16. So when you look at the transfer, keep that in mind. I don't know if it says it's a brand new master or not, but Super 16, I mean, it's not always going to look, well, it's definitely going to look different than 35. It's going to look a little grainier, and so you're going to notice that what you might think of as transfer flaws are more just the stock itself. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the transfer. There's not. But it doesn't gleam like a brand new 35 millimeter 4K restoration. But I was perfectly happy with it. I thought it was good. But knowing that it was shot on Super 16 kind of helped me understand the look of the film. So Smokler was hired because he had done This Is Spinal Tap, and because he was used to working with less than polished actors, which was part of what they were doing in this movie. They're bringing in some real surfers, and it's a real mix in terms of the cast. And Nia Peoples was actually the second choice, or sort of the recasting choice for the first girl that they had gotten that apparently didn't work out. And she really does help the movie a lot. She's a great anchor and love interest, and just generally sort of wonderful in this film with Matt Adler. But yeah, it's just a really sweet movie, and a movie that I like very much. And like I said, I know it has its fans, and it's exciting to see it get a Blu-ray, especially with this commentary. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in the commentary. I know that the origin of the film was that Randall Kleiser, he had, I guess while he was working on Blue Lagoon, he had gotten, just before he went to shoot it, he had gotten like a little surf shack on the North Shore. And while he was shooting Blue Lagoon, I guess his parents like fixed up the shack, and then he had this, little house on the North Shore, and he kept it all that time. And so he went to a screening. I think it was the premiere of Blake Edwards' film That's Life. Don't quote me on that. But he had heard that Blake Edwards had shot the film in his own home with his friends, and it sort of gave him this idea of like, oh, what if I shot a movie on the North Shore where I have my little house and did it like really low budget, and would that be interesting? Because he had noticed the divide between the locals and the surfers, and the locals and the tourists and all this stuff, and he thought there were some interesting dynamics there at play. And so he knew this guy William Phelps. He was a documentary filmmaker, or he'd made a couple surf documentaries, and he was like, oh, this is the guy. And so that's how they got together. And it's a really neat tandem commentary that they do, where they'll be talking, like one will be talking and the other will sort of pick up, almost like it's not planned. It's clearly unrehearsed, but it's just a nice flow. And I definitely enjoy that. Just Randall Kleiser as a commentator, I think is really interesting. If you can listen to his commentary on the Kino Lorber Blu-ray for Summer Lovers, is really good. And I like Summer Lovers a lot too, actually. I'd recommend that along with North Shore as another potential double bill with North Shore would be Summer Lovers. I think that'd be interesting. But yeah, it's a good little movie. It also has some old interviews with the cast and crew, including, I'm trying to think here, they talked to Matt Adler, they talked to Gregory Harrison, John Philbin, Jerry Lopez, who's one of the surfers, Nia Peoples. They talked to William Phelps. They talked briefly to Randall Kleiser. And it's about 28 minutes, but it looks to be shot on video, and I think it's from a DVD release previous to this. But it's a nice little, cast interview kind of thing. Definitely not brand new or anything. And then they have an alternate ending also, which is a little rough. It looks to be with the previous girl that was cast before Nia Peoples. But it's neat to have that there as well. I think that may have been part of the DVD, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, for 80s fans, for folks that like surf movies, and folks that just like really enjoyable coming of age kind of stuff, North Shore is highly recommended, and I'm very happy that Kino has brought this to Blu-ray. So check these two out at your leisure. And thank you guys for watching. I'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.